Hi, this is Patrick Conroy, and welcome to Family Law. This is our first chapter. It's very easy. We're only going to go over a few things that are mentioned in the chapter. Okay, first we're going to go over a little bit of a refresher on constitutional law, and this might be new to some of you. Um, and with constitutional law, basically the courts have said there are two types of fundamental rights. There's procedural due process, and that's the constitutional requirement that the government provide fair procedures, such as adequate notice, an opportunity to be heard, jury trials, search warrants, whenever the government seeks to deprive someone of life, liberty, or property. So those are, your Fourth Amendment rights, as well as those listed in the Constitution, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all of those. Substantive due process is the constitutional requirement that the government avoid arbitrary and capricious actions that deprive someone of life, liberty, or property, regardless of how fair the government might be in the procedures that led to that deprivation. Okay, the idea is that there are some fundamental rights that are so basic to being a person that the government can't just willy-nilly pass a law about those things. So that includes things like the right to privacy, the right to raise one's children, the rights to marry. Now, a constitutional law with substantive due process means that a fundamental right judged by strict scrutiny, which means that there can be restrictions, but they must be narrowly tailored to serve a compelling state interest. So let's take freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is guaranteed in the constitutional right. It's a fundamental right. So any law has to be narrowly tailored to serve a compelling state interest. For instance, fraud is not protected by the free speech. So it's not all speech. Fraud is not protected. Um, Things like threats made to someone to injure them, blackmail, um, and so on and so on. So there was really a state compelling interest, safety, um, that makes these narrow restrictions possible. A non-fundamental right means that it's judged by rational basics. There may be restrictions must be reasonably related to a legitimate state interest or purpose. So a fundamental right are those that are listed in the Constitution. And those are protected peoples too. Non-fundamental right might not be in the Constitution, but by a rational basis, if there's a law, there must be a rational basis, meaning that the restrictions must be reasonably related to a legitimate state interest or purpose. They can't be arbitrary. So a constitutional law, equal protection of the law. So if it's a fundamental right, judged by strict scrutiny. If it's a suspect class, judged by strict scrutiny. Suspect class means those groups that are listed in the Constitution. Religious groups, racial groups, women is sort of quasi-suspect class. But since the 14th Amendment lists race, national origin, and the First Amendment deals with religion, those are considered fundamental right, and those are suspect classes. Strict scrutiny. So quasi-suspect class is often women. Um, it could be something also like disabled people. Other classes, this is usually things like um, income levels. Um, Sometimes they might, people belonging to a non-recognized religion, those sorts of things. Now, also with constitutional issue is there's the federal constitution. Every state must comply with the federal constitutional law. So think of that as the floor. Everyone has those rights, but a state constitution can offer additional rights and protections. Same-sex relationship in the US Constitution. I'm not too sure when this slide was written because it's a little fuzzy, and I'm not too sure that they have the latest law in here. But basically, with there were laws that prohibited certain sexual acts in the privacy of one's own room, own house. Well, and those were applied primarily, when people were arrested, it always turned out to be gay people. And so the court looked at that and said, no, you know what? We're going to say that we've already said there's a right to privacy, and that right's going to extend to private consensual acts in someone's bedroom. Then with the marriage issue, they said marriage has already been determined by previous case law as a fundamental right. That case came from a case called Loewen v. Virginia, where two people of different races tried to get married, and there was a state law that prevented that. And the Supreme Court at that time said marriage was a fundamental right. So when the issue came up with same-sex marriage, they said marriage has already been determined to be a fundamental right. So we need strict scrutiny on these laws to make sure that they are narrowly tailored for state purpose. And that's where they ran into trouble because they couldn't really come up with a legitimate state reason because there was no harm that was being shown by these. They said it would disrupt the family units. Like, we have plenty of states that have same-sex marriage, and they are not showing any detriment to the family structure. So you need to be able to show real evidence of harm. Okay, this comes out, I'm not too sure where the book pulled this from, why it's in this chapter, but you should be aware. Okay, if you file for divorce and the other party wants to get evidence against you, they're going to use social media and your phone, especially text messages. Text messages often show an affair. Other things might show financial resources that they have not declared, bigamy pertaining to child custody, and evidence pertaining to domestic violence. So those are things that can be subpoenaed. We cover divorce later. Okay, a paralegal job in the family law. Many traditional law offices handle family law cases. Freelance work. A lot of paralegals don't work for a single law firm. They prefer to pick and choose their cases. And, attorneys that know them will call them and say, hey, I don't really want to hire a full-time paralegal, but I need help with this case. Government office, child support enforcement agencies. Volunteer work. CASA is court-appointed special advocate. And those are for cases where an adult needs to represent a child's interest. So they're the ones who are really going to be talking to the child and representing their interest in a court case. When you're working on family law cases, you need to be aware that you might have your own internal biases. And you have to let those go. If you have a bias against a religion or sexual orientation or any of those things, you have to let those go when you're dealing with the law because your job is to represent your client. Violence is unfortunately a reality in family law, and people go a little, intense and volatile when things like come up, like your ability to see your child, your financial situation. You need to be careful that clients or your clients' exes might be violent. So you have to prepare yourself and be protective. Where does family law come from? Primarily Constitution, statutes, court opinions, court rules, basic stuff that's applicable to all things. Also in Louisiana, we have, the code, the civil code, which has family laws written out. Secondary sources can be legal encyclopedias, legal periodicals, legal treatises. Those are used to help you find the primary sources. Wikipedia.com. Wikipedia can be a place to start your legal research because it will name the cases, but you can't use Wikipedia as a source because it's not even like really considered a secondary source because there's nothing guaranteeing that what's in Wikipedia is correct or current. Google Scholar. You can go to scholar.google.com, select case law if you want any cases on family law. You can select articles if you want legal periodical literature on family law. You can also go to links in Appendix D. This is where you'll find Louisiana Civil Code. And we'll lead you to portal in Exhibit 1.8, which is in your book. We'll show you. Okay, see, quick, easy lecture. I would like you to write down maybe something that you found interesting in this lecture, or something you didn't know, or something you disagree with or agree with. Any of those things, just some sort of reflection to show you learned something. Think.